Oh, you're back. You've been waiting, haven't you? I know, part 4 is where the story becomes incredibly magnetic and keeps you on edge waiting for the next installment. The trouble last time was brewing, but didn't seem too serious. This volume, however, has Rosemine becoming more involved with things that seem simple enough, but send ripples throughout the entire country. But certainly I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's slow down a second and maybe contemplate subscribing or something like that. Does help my channel grow after all. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into part 4, volume 2, and see just how bad Rosemine screws up. Our prologue begins from Solange's perspective as she's working in the library. Seeing Ehrenfest students transcribing already gets her thinking about the massive first week Rosemine's had. But the paper they're using is what draws her interest. But the faculty dining hall is flooded with talk of her exploits too. Chief among them is the revival of Schwartz and Weiss. Which is why Solange is being bombarded constantly with questions about how Rosemine did it, since no one believes she actually got ownership through a blessing. It's here that we get hints that Solange is a bit more religious than the other professors, because she thinks Rosemine is blessed by Mestianora, the goddess of wisdom. When it's time to close up shop for the day, she collects the keys from the kids for the carols, and has Schwartz and Weiss handle lending. That alone makes her grateful she doesn't have to do all the work by herself anymore. But after it's all cleaned up, she goes to the second floor to a statue of the goddess of wisdom and gives a verbal report, saying today was again spent in service and knowledge. She has her attendant Catherine bring food to her in her office. Catherine mentions how Solange used to love eating with the other professors, since she was cooped up in the library all by herself. That used to be her one chance to socialize. But since she has Schwartz and Weiss there now and people are bombarding her with questions, she really just wants a break. So after eating, she shuts the library down and heads to her chambers to write the log for the day. Schwartz and Weiss ask where their master is and why she isn't there with them, only for Solange to remind them that she's a student and she should be coming soon. Even Solange herself has things she wants to discuss with Rosemine in depth, so she's looking forward to her visits too. The fact that Solange is giving a report to the goddess statue and the fact that she just accepts that the blessing switched over Schwartz and Weiss's ownership over to Rosemine is our first hints at just how religious she is. Well, maybe religious isn't the right word, just how much she believes in Mestianora. This little tidbit becomes more relevant later on in the story, so here's your building blocks. Back to Rosemine's perspective in the dorm, Wilfried is leading the first years and commiserating Rosemine passing all her classes. Because while that's good for her, it basically means hell for her retainers. But at least it was worth it for everyone in her grade. Lisaletta and the attendants are all sad because they wish she would have taken longer to get her classes done. That way they would have had more time to finish theirs and go measure Schwartz and Weiss with her. And after a little bit of thought, Rosemine realizes why it's so important for them, and says she still has to schedule it, so that'll give them a bit more time, which they all appreciate. Wilfried says forget the shoe mills, since socializing now starts since they're done with their classes, and they need to figure out what they're going to push as trends. Grades are of course a major topic, and the scholars all say that Hartmut told them to say that Rosemine is behind their rising grades. Wilfried asks if she told him to do that, but she publicly denies it, and Hartmut's defense is it's not untrue. All this working in the shadows against her will is probably going to come back to bite him. The next bit of business is Rinsham was discussed, but the students simply say they borrowed it and it's popular in Ehrenfest. That's the perfect answer, so Rosemine approves for them to keep saying that, and adds on hairpins and pound cake as open game for tea parties, as long as the stores selling them aren't outed, because the actual business talks are going to be held during the Archduke Conference. In other news, drivable high beasts are now in vogue after Herscher's demonstration with shoe mills gaining popularity. She then asks the knights to gather information about the legends of Ferdinand, since he's still a pretty big deal in the academy after 10 years, which is our first hint why Ehrenfest isn't doing so great. Since they're all so focused on speed ditter, strategy isn't seen as that important, with Traugott taking the lead and saying Rosemine doesn't get it, and that power is all that really matters. He tells her to pretty much keep her nose out of knight business, but she hits back saying the Knight's Order has to hunt the Lord of Winter, so strategy and knowledge of your opponent is pretty damn important. She learns after giving them this bit of information that there's no written records of past ditter games or common fey beasts, since it's pretty much only ever told orally. So she tells them to get writing and researching, as that information will help future generations. Cue the attendants realizing that they don't write down professor preferences or really any other information essential to socializing, and that sort of record would save them a ton of time each year, since they're apparently regathering old information. Yeah, so they jump on that. Switching over to Wilfried, he wants advice for the upcoming cousin's tea party, and she doesn't really have a ton to offer. Frembeltag and Arnsbach are plummeting in the rankings, while Ehrenfest is rising. So the best info they have is he'll probably get asked about offering mana to help their neighbors, but Rosemine tells him to add that their Archduke candidates in Ehrenfest are going around the central district and filling it themselves. If Frembeltag refuses to do the same, then she's not going to help in the future, but if they do agree, she's willing to at least give them some advice to do so. Now for Arnsbach, she's willing to buy the information then and there. Roderick asks why they're all suddenly on guard against Arnsbach, when you know they're a greater duchy, and Ehrenfest should be supporting them. Besides, their first wife is family of the current Archduke, but she decides to share her encounter with Bindewald, and also adds that the attack on Charlotte hasn't entirely been resolved, which makes the kids of the former Veronica faction understand her attitude a bit more. Wilfried again tells her that she's getting a bit too close to the former Veronica faction kids, but she says she doesn't really blame them for following their parents' orders. She wants to get them on her side, even willing to cut off the parents doing so, because she really doesn't see them switching factions. And after that, Wilfried finally understands her intentions. This initial scene sets up the goals for this volume and next, where Rosemine's plans are laid out as well as sculpting her retainer's specialties. It also lays the groundwork for the bridge between this part and next with the former Veronica faction as she works to get them on her side. It's finally time for the library, so Rosemine gets up super early, ahead of even her retainers, and gets yelled at for that, of course. But Cornelius takes up the charge during breakfast to sort out the schedules for guard duty while she's there, because her going to the library this early is actually a huge burden on her retainers. Leonore is going to be her one guard going, which is pretty damn light, meaning Cornelius has to ask her to wait until classes begin, otherwise she could be in danger. And once it's time, you bet your ass she heads out. But as they walk, she's watching Leonore, and notices she's a bit more intelligent than the average knight, and asks how she feels about books. Now, she likes them more than most, but nowhere near as much as Rosemine does. So she's given the task to read over documents Rosemine finds, and convey the information to the rest of the apprentice knights. That's pretty much beneath an Archduke candidate, but Rosemine just assures everyone it's part of her duty as a member of the library committee. Oh, and that's our first red flag of the book, everyone, because all of her retainers are wondering what the hell that even is. She explains it, and it's basically an apprentice scholar, so her party grimaces. At the library, Schwartz and Weiss immediately approach to greet her, and she tops them off with mana. Solange is pretty stunned she's there already, but Rosemine explains how hard she worked for the library. With that, she can finally read, but she gets a quick personalized tour where she hears that they have well over 30,000 books. The first floor is all study documents and what most people use, but the second floor is where it's at. It's a full-blown chained library, and that's enough to give Rosemine a bookgasm. So, yeah, she's over the moon. These are gifted books and research documents, as professors tend to keep their stuff secret, but if it's deemed useless after their death, yeah, it of course ends up in the library. Scrolls are the easiest method for that, since it takes less work and there's no binding at all. After that, she sees a statue to Mestianora, cradling her divine instrument, the Goostersight. So I'm including this because it's important in like 5 volumes, and really important going into part 5. The Goostersight is the original Bible, with one transcription the goddess allowed one person to copy down. All the other copies are based off of that original transcription. Now it has a lot more functionality than that, but that's for later. So Rosemine gets talking about all the stuff she wants to do in the library, like introduce her decimal system, but Solange isn't really looking super pleased about that. Not that she doesn't want her help, but Rosemine is far above her in status. Also, she isn't a librarian. Riarda even has to step in and tell her to stop troubling Solange. With that, she gets a book, reads until it's time to go, and then bounces for lunch. On the way back, Riarda tells her how bad that went. She's so far behind on socializing that she dropped that on a med noble in public. That's pretty much out of the question. Riarda was struggling to not just grab her and flee from the library in shame, all because of how blunt Rosemine was being. This just makes Rosemine think to have a tea party to lavish Solange with sweets. That actually worked for Sylvester and Ferdinand in the Italian restaurant, to the point Ferdinand even praised her for doing so. In the dorm, she tells her attendants she wants to invite Solange to a tea party. Lieseletta and Brunhilde are a bit troubled by that statement, but get to work with Riarda cutting to the chase. Why is she trying to lavish Solange? She explains that she thought it was normal to butter someone up before a request, but that's only half right. Sylvester and Ferdinand are of higher status than her, so buttering them up is considered a matter of course before making a request, because they actually have the authority to refuse her. When it's someone lower in status, that's basically considered a form of intimidation, saying I'm so far above you and I'm still pouring in this much effort. Why won't you just do what I want already? You know you can't refuse, right? Her attendants are likewise in a similar situation, as they're obligated to do their jobs, but are also hesitant because they know they're setting up Solange for a trap. Rosamine tries to weasel out of that, saying Solange is actually a professor, so technically she's supposed to be higher status than her, but that's actually a legal fiction. Yeah, technically teaching professors are, but also outside of class, students will ignore professors of lower status. So Riarda frames it, saying imagine that Sylvester wanted to help out with printing, but he also wanted it done his way. Immediately, Rosamine understands exactly what she's getting at. Riarda needs to get through to Rosamine to not just give her orders, but explains what she desires so that they can guide her to accomplishing her real goals. This is actually a huge pain, because Riarda considers this a failure on her part, as a first-rate attendant would already be achieving this before their master even said a word. But due to Rosamine's upbringing, she can't really wrap her head around what this girl's thinking most of the time. That's what's actually leading to a ton of problems. So Rosamine asks how to get the library committee made, and even that's not really the right question. So how does she get Solange to let her help in the library? Her attendants tell her to hold a tea party to get closer to Solange, and then she can make the request to Schwartz and Weiss's master to get the reforms implemented that she wants. So when she gets back to the library after lunch, she apologizes to Solange and probes about a tea party. She's open to the idea, but she can't exactly leave the library now, can she? Since, you know, she's the only librarian. And that's when Rosamine strikes. She mentions the book she's making, keeping the previous ones she's made a secret, and that opens up the topic of the stories the library has. Solange takes her to a storybook, and Rosamine and Felina get reading. Now Felina struggles with the old language, so she'll have to work on that. But Rosamine breezes on through it because she regularly reads the Bible. When it's time to go, she checks out the book and, holy shit, it's 3 large golds, which is damn high. But yeah, she still pays it. The next day, Heartmoon and Cornelius join them, and this is when things start to get interesting. With more people, Rosamine's willing to pay for transcriptions. And yeah, each course needs information. Heartmoon and Felina get strategy on treasure-stealing Ditter. Cornelius and Leonore get some documents on Fey Beasts and Fey Plants to transcribe, making Rosamine connect the dots finally that Leonore has the thing for Cornelius. And Solange remarks to her that she also wants to have a leisure talk sometime soon. She suggests holding a tea party in Solange's chambers, but Rosamine will provide the music, sweets, and tea to ease the burden. And that actually sounds like a plan. So back in the dorm, she tells her attendants the good news, and Brunhilde is shocked this is before even the music professor's tea party. Turns out this might not actually be so bad, as it will allow them to gauge how the sovereignty nobles handle their pound cakes. But aside from that, they have to work to get Rosamine prepared for topics that might come up, and also keep her from only talking about books. It's not like that's going to be a recurring theme throughout this part. Yeah, like people keeping an eye on her so she doesn't lose her mind over books during important socializing events. I mean, this is Rosamine we're talking about. She's not going to be like that, right? So it's settled, and on the day of the party, they all go to the library with a cart full of tea and sweets. Rosina is with them as well to play some music during, at least if Solange allows it. Remember, her chambers are right off the library. Since they couldn't find any info on her preferences, they brought just the basics for pound cake to test how well it handles in the market. Felina is going as her scholar to transcribe the conversation, but that's more training for Felina than actually serving a purpose. Though they did give her some paper and ink, with Brunhilde telling her her transcription is important to learn how their trends are received in the sovereignty. In the library, they head to Solange's office where they set up. Rosamine does a demonstrative test, and though the pound cake is seen as rustic, its light flavor gets a compliment, which is crazy considering how much sugar it has. But the fact that it's customizable with cream, jam, and toppings is a bonus. Solange comments on her hair ornament, showing there's interest in that too. The next topic is music, and Solange likes the song dedicated to Mestianora, since there's so few songs about her. That's a good hint that her song will go over well at the music professor's tea party later. But for Schwartz and Weiss's measurements, the sooner it's done, the better. But also, they'll probably need to do it in the Ehrenfest dorm. The reason being their clothing is packed full of face stones and magic circles that protect them. When they're being fitted is the moment they're most vulnerable, and also likely to be stolen. So limiting the possible people with access is their best bet. For the fashion, Solange says they can do whatever they want, as long as the sleeves aren't too long. They still need to be practical outfits because if their sleeves are too long, they tend to get dirty and also knock things over, since the shoe mills aren't exactly intelligent enough to compensate for them. After that's settled, Rosamine hands over the manuscript for the children's stories that she's compiling, and Solange is thoroughly impressed. but she does say she's not exactly sure how many kids in the academy, or adults for that matter, will appreciate them, making Rosemine realize she probably should be broadening her scope about now. Solange comments on all the strange things coming out of Ehrenfest, but the paper Felina is using is what catches her interest the most. Rosemine explains the basics about it being a new industry and its mass production, but doesn't exactly give it all away with calling it plant paper, and just calls it new instead. Rosemine gives Solange a few sheets as a gift, and that pretty much ends the tea party, with it being a huge success. Back in the dorm, they have a recap session and strategy meeting for the next tea party with the music professors, where Brunhilde plans to make a sweeter pound cake as a base and go from there. Wilfried asks what was covered, and she says that plant paper is of great interest to the professors, and also says to call it new paper from now on. Further, Hartmut says the professors seem to have an obligation to record their research findings, and their paper may prove to be a cheaper alternative to parchment and scrolls, encouraging bookbinding in the process. And that gets Rosemine thinking about stationary accessories, like 3-ring binders and folders for storage. She starts scribbling these down on her diptych, but Wilfried chides her for getting distracted, while the scholars on the other hand are actually incredibly interested in her diptych, so she offers to introduce them later. Rosemine's less certain that she's ready for the music professor's tea party, but everyone assures her that she's fine, since Rosina will be attending to showcase her songs. Because, she can't exactly play her own music yet. But the biggest news is the Archduke candidate from Klausenberg, Eglantine, is also attending. Now, who is that, and why should we actually care? Klausenberg is the first-ranked duchy, and Eglantine is an honor student who's playing the Goddess of Light in the dedication world, so she's the girl who impressed Rosemine so much during practice. But just as she's getting excited, Herscher bursts in to ask if a date for Schwartz and Weiss's measurement has been decided. And yeah, it has. She clarifies again that only her attendants will be allowed to touch the shoe mills, and they're also going to need all guards on hand to protect them during transport. So yeah, plans are already set. Time for the tea party, and she's bringing pound cake as well as the sheet music, with the lyrics for the song that she wrote. Rosina is super nervous, but even her retainers tell her that they get nervous during tea parties with professors. They head to the 3rd floor of the attendant course building, which makes Rosemine ask where Herscher's room is. Yeah, she stays in the scholar building despite being a dorm supervisor and actually having a room in the dorm. Now she's supposed to eat with the students too, but there's a lot of circumstances behind why she doesn't. Everyone pretty much just writes it off as her research would cause foul odor, so they're kinda happy she's not there, but it's a bit more complicated and moderately more sad than that. At the professor's tea party, Rosemine is shocked to not just see the guest that she was expecting, but also Prince Anastasius. Sensing the confusion, a professor tells her that since Eglantine is there, the prince also requested to join, which was essentially an order, and they ask Rosemine if that's okay, which she can't refuse either, so she accepts. Eglantine is the first to speak, and mentions how they greeted one another at the fellowship gathering last book, but haven't spoken proper since then. She was really looking forward to this tea party and music, cueing Rosemine to assume that she's dedicated to the arts, even name-dropping Christine to put Rosemine at ease, because as it turns out, Christine's ability with the Harspiel really impressed all the music professors when she was attending. Yeah, she's graduated by now though. She mentions how she hasn't had a chance to meet Christine in person yet, but her personal musician Rosina was among her favorites. This is the opening for Rosina to start playing at Rosemine's instruction, and it's clear that she and the music are a hit. They start to eat and sip tea, with Anastasius calling the pound cake a poverty dish based on its appearance. Eglantine says that it may look rustic, but the flavor is anything but. He takes a bite too, and doesn't really say much after that, but his pound cake disappears before long, suggesting he liked it quite a bit, especially with the Rumtopf topping. So Rinsham comes up next, and Eglantine hints that she would like some too, but Rosemine says it's not for sale quite yet, and she only has some small bottles left. But Anastasius orders her to sell some right then and there. That sends a wave of panic, with Eglantine telling him that he can't order that as trade is handled during the Archduke conference. Now he was doing it for her sake, but Rosemine tries to cover, offering to share a little bit of what she has left. That sort of annoys Anastasius, since, she refused his order, but she has a story already in place, saying it would be rude not to prepare a ton for another Archduke candidate or royalty, especially if they're selling it. It's gotta be high quality and high quantity, which he merely remarks how bold she is. He then orders her to write a song dedicated to the Goddess of Light for Eglantine, and that he's also willing to purchase it. Everyone tries to tell him how impossible it is to just, order that, especially since he wants it before graduation. But Rosemine borrows a table and Rosina and begins hammering out a tune right then and there in front of everyone. They're all stunned after she gets the general song out, but it needs to be arranged and lyrics written. She asks if it's acceptable, only for Anastasius to be at a loss for words. Eglantine loves it though, and Rosemine goes a bit too far in complimenting her, saying her whirling was an inspiration. Anastasius stands up at that point, says that he hates the song, and orders her to give it to Eglantine before storming out. Yeah, Rosemine's terrified she just pissed off the prince, but Eglantine excuses herself to go calm him down. It's here we learn from the music professors that Anastasius is courting Eglantine. Why? Because word on the street is she's a former princess, her biological father being the third prince, and her family was assassinated. Now she survived because she wasn't even baptized yet and didn't eat with her family, so the poison they used didn't actually end up on her plate. After that, she was adopted by the previous Ob Klausenberg, her grandfather, and he regrets taking her status away from her, since she's now no longer a princess. So yeah, there's a bit of a struggle for her hand right now, because whomever she weds is essentially guaranteed the throne, with the first prince and second prince fighting for her hand in marriage. But as it turns out, Anastasius is in it for love, not power. But the music professors turn out to be quite the gossips, and mentions how this reminds them of Sylvester chasing Florencia when they were in school. That pretty much concludes the tea party with the music professors. Anyone paying attention's probably thinking, oh, that's cute. Rosemine should probably stay really far away from that situation though. So let's continue, where she does everything in her power to not stay far away from that situation. It's now time to measure Schwartz and Weiss. At third bell, Rosemine and her crew are bringing them back to the dorm, and all the girls who raced to finish their classes just barely made it. It's here that we learn that even nobles can't get away from sewing practice, as noble women are expected to be quite skilled. The reason is a bit different, because it's mainly meant for protective charms for their children rather than full-blown clothing. But they will make that too for incredibly young children, especially for family members as practice. Ursher is also in the dorm, seeing plant paper for the first time. But as she bitches, the students tell her she would have seen it earlier had she spent some time in the dorm like any other supervisor does. Ursher's using this for her notes, because those are going to be studied and eventually shipped back to Ehrenfest, so they can make clothing for the shoe mills. Ferdinand's definitely going to be pleased. When it's time, she goes to the library with a veritable army of people, and is told by Solange that she needs to hold on to them in order to leave the library since they can't leave without their master. Rosemine simply touching them causes a stir among the many girls who came to look at Schwartz and Weiss, as no one is supposed to be able to even touch them, so Ehrenfest is now drawing a ton of looks. With that, they race back to the dorm and the measuring begins. The clothes are stripped, Lieseletta and Brunhilde do most of the actual measuring, while all the girls who wanted to be present take notes, and Ursher and the scholars are writing down precise details on the magic circles on Schwartz, Weiss, and their outfits. The charms on the clothing are actually super elaborate, to the point that most 6-years are even struggling to understand, but Ursher's just loving this. Many of the older students are agitated that Felina is given permission to touch the clothes, since they can't, and she hasn't even taken the scholar course proper, so she's really not the best choice for transcribing these magic circles. But in the end, they get it all done and have lunch. Ursher is now seriously contemplating moving back into the dorm, mostly after tasting the food, but also to keep an eye on Rosemine. And after lunch, the shoe mills are dressed, Ursher leaves to get to work on turning these notes into proper reference documents, and it's time to take them back to the library. But they've been alerted that Dunkelfelger is currently looking for Rosemine in the shoe mills. So, who or what is Dunkelfelger? They're the second-ranked duchy, one who's incredibly militarily focused with a huge number of skilled knights. So all hands are on deck, as the entirety of Ehrenfest's apprentice knights are assembled to guard the shoe mills on their way back to the library. Wilfried is only left with a single knight to watch him, since, he's gonna be staying behind. But before they head out the door, Rosemine blesses them with Angreif's blessing, despite the other knights not jumping on it until Cornelius and Angelica do so without question. Now they're prepped and ready to go, but she gives them a stern reminder before they open the door. Do not be the first ones to attack. Schwartz and Weiss tell Rosemine to pour some more mana into their charms, because those charms will protect her too. So she obliges. They head out and along the way bump into a few duchies led by Dunkelfelger, who insinuate she stole the magic tools. But she claps back, saying she's actually returning them, and they're the ones interfering with royal business. Leading these people is the 4th-year Archduke candidate from Dunkelfelger, Lestalot. Tensions keep rising, until Ehrenfest finally decides to punch through. Rosemine is picked up by Riarda with Schwartz and Weiss on her back, and then they book it for the library while the knights distract Dunkelfelger and the smaller duchies. But as they're running, an attack comes right for them, and the charms on Schwartz and Weiss activate, sending the attack flying right back. It took a ton of mana, but it's pretty impressive, considering Rosemine is wearing multiple charms to do the exact same thing. But before they get to the library though, Anastasius rushes in and calls Rosemine and Lestalot before him to put an end to the fight. Around this point in the story, most people are probably expecting him to just be an ass. But the dude's honestly a decent leader. He gets both sides of the story and doesn't just side with Lestalot, the one who's higher in status. Right on. So he asks what happened, hears from Dunkelfelger that Ehrenfest stole the magic tools from the library, and they're trying to take them back. But Rosemine says she received permission to take them, and was fulfilling her duty as their master. Dunkelfelger is actually the ones trying to steal them. Anastasia says call the dorm supervisors to get this sorted, but Rosemine asks to return the tools first. So, he gives her permission and they move location. After that though, she's confused by Lestalot. He even wants the tools, since he's not into reading at all. But her retainers are confused how she doesn't even understand this. You have to understand, owning those tools is a huge bragging right, basically saying you've got the endorsement of the royal family. So yeah, this is a pretty big deal. They gather up, but Hersher won't come to the meeting because she's already researching. Anastasius looks to Rosemine, but she says it'd be nice to have a better supervisor in the first place. Which he smacks back pretty hard, saying Ehrenfest needs to produce better nobles for that to even be on the table. So basically Hersher is their fault, and the supervisor they deserve. So she does one last trick. She sends an ordinance saying the tools are going to be taken unless she comes right now. And a few seconds later, Hersher shows up, pretty much shitting a brick. Yeah, this is going to affect her research, so she's invested. While they're waiting for her verse though, Anastasius asks Rosemine how she managed to become their master, and she says it was through a blessing about her joy being in the library. He takes that to mean that she's mocking him, but she says that's actually what happened, and if he's really that curious, asks Elaine for the details. So he will. Lestalot levies the claim that they tried to steal the tools for their dorm, but Rosemine says she'll hand them over if another master is worthy, or if they could, get an arch-noble librarian to the academy. Anastasia says her logic is sound, but just not possible. A temporary master seems to be working, so no reason to rock the boat. I just want to point this out, the royal family dances around this quite a bit to not seem weak, but if there was any area hit hardest by the purge, it was the sovereignty. They have zero manpower to spare, so Rosemine asking for people to do crap just comes off as childish whining. Ralphin steps forward because, of course, you probably could have guessed that he was the dorm supervisor for Dunkelfelger, and says that they should settle the score with a game of Ditter, but they're gonna do the treasure-stealing variety. That's pretty much what it was invented for. Anastasia says that works and fucks off to go to class. Why is this the plan? Because if Ehrenfest can't protect the tools, then this'll prove it, and Dunkelfelger wins the rights fair and square. Perfect. So they go to the Knights building with Hersher telling her that she has to win at all costs. And yeah, that's Rosemine's intention. She's not going to hand these tools over to somebody who doesn't go to the library at all. For an introduction to treasure-stealing Ditter, the rules are thus. Hunt a Fey Beast and try and bring it back to your treasure area. You have to protect it while trying to capture or kill your opponent's Fey Beast. Either of those will result in your victory, with the added condition that at the end of the time limit, Ehrenfest will win. Ralphin doesn't actually care about the tools here, he really just wants to see how Ferdinand's disciple handles this game. Yeah, he's got high hopes. At that, realizing he'll probably be a pain in her ass, she toys at the idea of losing, but that won't do. They absolutely have to win. Since this game is based on team size and they have 25 knights in Ehrenfest, that means Dunkelfelger, with its huge number of knights, gets to pick their best of the best. Rosemine asks if magic tools, face stones, potions, and everything else are cool to use. Ralphin says it's all pretty much allowed, so go nuts. I mean, that's how treasure-stealing Ditter is meant to be played. But hey, that kinda sounds like she's planning on playing too. And she is. Everyone tries to tell her no, but she flat out refuses to budge. I mean, these are her magic tools on the line, so she's gonna be in this fight, even though she's a first-year Archduke candidate constantly on her deathbed. That forces Lestalot into the game himself, so he's not seen as weak. Ralphin likes the cut of her jib, so he approves. So before the game officially begins, Ehrenfest has a strategy meeting where Rosemine tells them her plan. I mean, she's the highest in status, so she takes charge. Also, probably worth noting, she's read the most on Ditter's strategy, with enough knowledge from Ferdinand and Eckhart to probably pass the written classes for the entire Knights course already, so if anybody's qualified, it's actually probably her. So she tells them to go find a weak-ass Fey Beast they can bind in bands of light that won't put up much of a fight. Traugott thinks that's dumb because it's easy picking through Dunkelfelger, but she has a plan here. She's gonna throw that thing into Lessie, and would love to see them try and break through her mana to touch it. Traugott says that's not how the game is supposed to be played, and that's loser thinking right there, because it doesn't say they can't do that in the rules, and fuck his stupid notion of honor. The idea is crazy and they're all apprehensive, but it's also crazy enough to work. Aside from that, she's thinking the best offense is good defense here. I mean, they win once time runs out. If they can stall, they might as well. But Traugott again complains that's not how the game is supposed to be played. Pretty much talking down to her that she doesn't know what she's talking about. Laying it on a bit thick, aren't we? So with the promise that if they can hold out, Rosemine will give Traugott and Angelica a chance to go all out. She just needs someone who can throw super accurate to pull off her plan. Step in Judith, who's a fantastic sniper. She'll be in Rosemine's high beast with Leonore as well. That way they can oversee the battle and dish out commands. The two of them will also be the last line of defense. And if things really go tits up, Rosemine's planning on Shutsaria's shield saving the day. When the bell chimes signaling the start of the game, a group breaks off to go hunt while the rest wait. Tunkelfelger laughs and they see the Fey Beast they brought back, and Rosemine chucks it on into Lessie, much to their confusion. But the question comes up, why are they all just standing around? When Dunkelfelger is coming back with their weakened Fey Beast, shouldn't they, attack it then and there? Again, everyone thinks that would end the game before it even officially began, but no. Remember, the game's already started. That means this is a viable strategy. So she tells the attackers to do just that, and they launch a surprise attack, and that works pretty damn well, causing some confusion. But after a bit, Dunkelfelger's better tactics make their team regroup, and after that, Ehrenfest isn't doing much to them. The difference in coordination is night and day here. Rosamine comments how much of a failure the apprentices are compared to the order back home, but Traugott asks her what she would even know about that. She didn't even join the battle, she wasn't there, but she says she saw it all from afar. And that's how she can tell. She's seen the whole picture. Traugott threw the command hierarchy into disarray with his blind rage attack style, ignoring orders. He keeps arguing, but Rosemine eventually just shuts him up, and they get back to the fight. In the second wave, Dunkelfelger has them on the back foot, and this is where Leonore and Judith see firsthand just how poorly coordinated their apprentices are. It was for this reason Rosemine was reluctant to win at the start, because this will inflate their ego, but she also can't bring herself to lose here. There's too much on the line. So she's letting them struggle in hopes that some of this will sink in. It's also helpful that her guards are there to witness this folly. When their defensive line crumbles, Rosemine has Judith unleash her master plan. She took a Ruel fruit dyed with her mana, poured some ultra nasty potion on it, and launched it at Dunkelfelger's Fey Beast with Judith's slingshot. Her aim is good and it lands right in the target's mouth. And then, as we've seen before with the Goldsay, it grows massive. Suddenly Dunkelfelger has to pull their offensive line back to rein in their Fey Beast. But as they weaken it, she has Cornelius and Angelica deliver the killing blow. She tells Cornelius to use a massive mana attack she's seen Ferdinand, Karstedt, and Eckhart all do. Much to his shock, because where would she have even seen that? But she's accompanied them on religious ceremonies before, is the excuse. So they do that, and in a massive flash of light, Dunkelfelger's Fey Beast is no more, leading to their victory. Ralphin congratulates them, and that's that. Lestalot says she's no saint for using such dirty tricks, and he's pretty pissed off at her, but she compliments Dunkelfelger's skill as knights, saying it put her own duchy to shame, even going as far as saying they're an example, which earns her the respect from their knights. Anastasius shows up to see the results, and Ralphin starts to tell him, but he doesn't actually give a shit about the details. Yeah, as long as a winner is chosen, it doesn't matter, and Lestalot really can't complain. To end it, Anastasius tells Rosemine to come to his villa the next day to discuss the magic tools of Solange. Back in the dorm, Wilfried is freaking out about how she played Ditter with Dunkelfelger, was summoned by a prince, and how the hell is he gonna fit all this into a report back home? After dinner, the knights are holding a strategy meeting to go over their match and where to improve, using Rosemine's advice, and she heads up to her room where Riarda is absent. Weirdly, wow, I just can't fathom why she wouldn't be there after her grandson disobeyed an order from his lady during a game that could have gotten her killed. Now it's time for her meeting with Anastasius, where Riarda suggested she bring a pound cake to improve his mood. So she brings two, one made with honey and another made with Rumtoff, expecting the honey to end up as a gift for Eglantine. Turns out royalties stay at the end of the hall by the bottom-ranked duchies, most likely to keep an eye on the slackers and force them to improve. They get in, and after the gift is given, he clears the room of everyone but his retainers. He says they've decided to let Rosemine be the master of Schwartz and Weiss for her stay in the academy. He brings up the attack that happened yesterday, but Solange is worried that it was Arnsbach. That's the first time they've come up in this discussion. Turns out a girl from their duchy came by and was inquiring about becoming Schwartz and Weiss's master, and it's heavily implied that it was Det Lind. So now Anastasius is worried that another duchy has their eyes on the tools. He asks how she even became the master, and Solange explains that she prayed to Mestianora, and and her prayers were answered, which is pretty fucking bizarre. The reason this seems so absurd is, well, 1. Prayers aren't generally answered because nobles aren't really devout believers despite invoking the gods constantly, but 2. The previous owner died before passing on ownership. That means someone needed to override that by pouring more mana into them than they had from their original owner, and they react violently to those who touch them and aren't authorized. So Rosemine doesn't really get how crazy this is, and the audience doesn't really understand until later on through side stories. So with that mess cleared up, Anastasius asks how she knew about certain mana requirements, mainly Light and Dark Stone, Schwartz, and Weiss. She learned this through Hersher's look at the magic circles. That being said, she could have probably avoided most of these issues yesterday by mentioning that to Lestalot. He actually lacks the dark element, but it does strike Rosemine as odd how often she's visiting to fill them up with mana, because Solange mentioned that they worked for a year after the previous librarians left. They poured so much mana that they were on the verge of death. Anastasius clarifies that they were connected to nobles who supported the 4th and 1st Prince. So the arch-noble librarians can't return not because they were assigned to a different place, but because they've climbed the towering stairway. She thinks them being property of royalty would, maybe give them higher priority, especially considering the cultural significance, but Anastasia says that more tools are shut down after the purge, and the academy isn't really the royal family's priority right now. That's even an understatement. Anastasius, his brother, and the king are all working their asses off pouring mana into this country. The current king was raised as a vassal, so he didn't receive the proper education to do everything that needs to be done, so he's barely holding this country together. Anastasius laments how much he wishes she was merely an archnoble and not an archduke candidate. Yeah, they can't be moved to the sovereignty outside of marriage to the royal family to prevent poaching of talented individuals. So she says she'll keep helping as long as she's able to, and that'll pretty much have to do. Solange is dismissed, but Rosemine has to stay. The reason he really called her there was he explains that Eglantine is going to invite her to a tea party soon, and he wants Rosemine to ask her intentions. Rosemine doesn't really get the layers of euphemism here, and has to admit her ignorance since her retainers aren't there, which really just comes off as her rubbing the prince's face in this. This is actually a nice humanizing moment for Anastasius, as he's actually a guy who's completely lovesick. The issue is, he's courting her properly through third parties, like he's supposed to, but she keeps dodging the issue of who's gonna escort her to a graduation ceremony. Yeah, that's pretty much announcing that they're engaged. He wants her to ask because Eglantine seems to lower her guard around Rosemine, probably because she looks so young, so she has no choice but to ask when she gets the chance to. Yeah, this is an order from royalty after all. So 2 days later, Rosemine's been reading and still hasn't received her invite. Cornelius and Leonore thinking about the Apprentice Knight's training regimen, where Cornelius wants to reread Eckhart's notes, the new Fae-Beast weakness information they found in the library in mind. Also probably return home to talk to Karstedt for a bit. He is the knight's commander after all. As the two chat and Rosemine silently ships them, Brunhilde notices the smile on her face and asks if she's providing her support to Leonore. But Rosemine's finally smart enough to deny it. While it's nice to root for their little romance, she hasn't talked to her family about it, and with her position as the Archduke's daughter, it would pretty much secure Leonore as a place as his wife. Yeah, big problem. Especially with the whole Angelica marriage up in the air and the friction it could cause among her retainers, it's just best for her to do nothing, and Brunhilde approves of that decision. Back in the dorm, she can hear Riarda screaming as soon as she comes in, and that's an issue. Yeah, Traugot's in trouble, and her retainers all seem aware of why, though she isn't, but she asks Cornelius to go inform Riarda of their return. Before dinner, Angelica has a tea party invite and she hands it to Rosemine, who passes it on off to Brunhilde, and it turns out Angelica is making massive headway in her classes. But they still need to stay on top of this or else she'll start slacking. Rosemine offers her the 4th step of her mana compression method as a reward, and Angelica is all about that, but Cornelius wants it too. In fact, all of her retainers are invested, so she makes a deal that if Angelica passes her classes before she has to return to Ehrenfest, she'll teach all of her retainers the 4th step. Also, they'll need to raise their duchy's rank above 12th in the next conference. Rosemine also takes the complaining from the former Veronica faction into account and asks Sylvester about changing the contract so they could switch factions if they want. That'll be important later. So with that on the table, Traugot's pumped, and even Hartmut's invested, as he plans to get involved in the night's studying to get them to improve. After dinner though, Riarda asks to borrow Rosemine in a room, and pulls Traugot and all of her retainers inside. Once there, she asks her to relieve Traugot of duty. That's basically firing him, and would ruin his career as well as leave a stain on Riarda's family. Hell, Riarda's the one who vouched. That's extra bad for her. She'd been telling him to resign for days at this point. But why would she want him to? Simple. Traugot disobeyed orders during dinner. When asked if he'll do better in the future by Rosemine, he lies. And Hartmut adds that he plans to resign as soon as he learns her mana compression method. Turns out he doesn't want to serve someone as weak as Rosemine, someone who can get knocked unconscious by a fucking snowball. It's not exactly uncommon for retainers to join for their own reasons, but loyalty and obeying orders is the main thing they have to do, and Traugot doesn't have that. So, getting both sides of the story, she talks to him using a sound blocking magic tool. Turns out Traugot wishes to get stronger like Bonifatius. Now, Bonifatius was the Knight's commander before retiring, and he didn't serve as a guard knight to the Archduke. The reason being, Archduke candidates can't serve anyone. Traugot missed that part of the memo, and thinks he wouldn't have to serve anyone either if he became the Knight's commander like Bonifatius. So, he wants to be strong, recognized as better than Cornelius, because he has a massive one-sided rivalry with him, and ultimately become the Knight's commander. Rosemine understands his goal and tells him that's impossible, but he doesn't want to listen. In his eyes, he used to be stronger than Cornelius, but once he and Angelica got that compression method, they shot so far ahead and praise for him dried up. Yeah, seems sympathetic enough, but as soon as he starts shitting on Daniel in front of Rosemine, she's fucking done with him. Like, absolutely completely. She wants him cut off from her world entirely. That leaves her now thinking about how to best surgically remove him without doing damage to those she cares about. And she comes up with the plan pretty quickly. She'll let him quit on his own, while also agreeing to teach him the mana compression method. The only condition is he can't cause problems and earn the money himself. So, pretty much what the others have to do as well. She tells him to put down the tool and announces resignation, which he does. As soon as Riarda hears that, she's in an outrage, saying she can't just let him resign now. But Hartmut is on it and hands the paperwork over. All Traugot has to do is sign. So he does, and pieces the fuck out. With him finally gone, they want to know what the hell she's thinking, saying she's being far too soft on him, but in her mind she's not. She tells Riarda that if she's being soft on anyone here, it's her. She cares so little for Traugot, she wants him just completely out of her life. And for her, this was the best way to do that. The magic contract has a clause stating people can't go against her. On top of that, he's focused on the short-sighted gains. He won't have a happy life here in the dorm now, and any future career paths are pretty much over for him. His family won't let him marry outside the duchy, and he'll be stuck as a regular knight in the order, living in mediocrity. That was a pretty cold and calculating plot she thought up on the spot. It demonstrates just how much Ferdinand is rubbing off on her. Riarda isn't satisfied though. She thinks they should send him to the temple, but Rosemine gives a hard pass. Hartmut is thoroughly impressed by how skillfully she cut him off, but she has some words for him too. She doesn't want a scholar who's selective with their information. It's her place to judge when and where she uses it, not his. She expects him to tell her all he knows, because her metric for a scholar is Eustace. Later, after Cornelius finishes his classes, he's talking with Rosemine about how hard it is to balance her trips to the library with tutoring Angelica. Through that conversation, she briefly remembers that she'll have to tell Benno about the influx of paper and Rensham orders that are sure to come, but the topic shifts to who Cornelius will escort when he graduates next year. She asks if he's gonna escort Elvira, and he says either her or one of his aunts. That's to make sure no one mistakes her as a fiancée. That sort of mistake can happen with siblings, so they always escort someone way older to their graduation. She asks if he has anyone in mind, and that makes him flustered, as he's gonna ask the girl in question when he's ready. That tells us he does have someone, and also she doesn't know it yet, but that only makes Leonore more worried. Meanwhile, the date for the tea party with Eglantine is decided, and they get to work making preparations. Brunhilde suggests taking a small jar of Rensham as a gift. They also decide to showcase pound cake variety, and the song she's working on isn't quite ready yet. Besides, they're gonna want to run it by Anastasius before giving it to her. When the day comes, they head to Klausenberg's tea party room, and it's fancy as hell, even by noble standards, with walls completely covered in cloth like wallpaper and stone furniture. During the tea party, the pleasantries go well, and she learns that Anastasius talks about her quite a bit to Eglantine, since both seem pretty interested in her. Specifically, the dinner game came up, and she drops that Ralphin is probably looking for a rematch sometime soon. Eglantine shifts the topic to whirling after that, saying she likes Rosemine's, but Rosemine returns saying that if hers is good, it's only because she's based it off Eglantine's, which makes her blush. To the point that she comments for the second time that if Rosemine was a man, she'd have fallen for her then and there. That tells her she might want to pass that little bit of info on to Anastasius. to praise her whirling. Talk then shifts to Rosemine needing to leave for the temple for the dedication ritual soon, and Eglantine seems weirdly interested in that. She asks what type of ritual it is, and remarks how Ehrenfest is keeping old traditions alive, with having the Archduke's children fulfilling roles in the temple. Now that's news to Rosemine. Eglantine then busts out some sound-blocking magic tools, and passes it on over for a private discussion. Turns out she's trying to join the temple herself, and was curious how Rosemine managed. But why does she want to? Because this potential marriage to royalty is a huge burden. Not to her, but the country itself. The previous Ob Klausenberg wishes for her to return to royalty, but she only wants peace and no more bloodshed. If marrying one of the princes sparks another bout of war, she'd be absolutely devastated. She's already been refused to enter the temple to avoid this, but she's looking for some way to spin it to help her duchy. However, Rosemine says she's fated to quit being the High Bishop when she comes of age, so their circumstances aren't the same. Her only option to avoid marrying into royalty is to become the next Archduchess of Klausenberg, but her nephew/cousin is next in line. Her plan is to not make a decision until either ordered by the king or the Ob himself. She asks Rosemine to keep it a secret, and I mean she will, but it's not like anybody would believe her anyway. But other than that, she extends the interest Klausenberg has in Ehrenfest's new products, so Rosemine's gonna tell Sylvester later. The circumstances are obviously a bit more complicated than that, since Eglantine is dealing with trauma. That'll play out in the side stories this part. After her tea party, she spent days in the library, when suddenly Anastasius approaches her. Yeah, in the goddamn library of all places. He was waiting for her to report, but she never contacted him. What the actual fuck? She thinks her excuse of vowing to never approach him will work, but no, that's bullshit. He drags her to his villa to talk, and since it's such a long walk, it's straining her quite a bit, to the point Riarda has to step in and carry her. She tells the prince that she's frail and she'll carry her the rest of the way, making Anastasius a little concerned, but not enough to call it quits. Even in his villa, his head attendant gives him a reproachful look because of how bad Rosemine looks, and he still dragged her there. But they clear the room regardless, and he asks for a full report on what happened. Rosemine says that Eglantine is going to be escorted by a family member, which Anastasius has heard before. She adds on though that she isn't planning to choose either him or his brother, hoping to cut things off there. But that's news to Anastasius. Why? Because Eglantine hasn't told him her issues. Rosemine's forced to spill the beans here by royal decree, so she flat out says that Eglantine was traumatized by the Civil War costing her her family, and desperately doesn't want to be the cause of another, so she doesn't want either prince. Well damn, Anastasius was under the impression that she wanted to return to royalty, so Rosemine clears the air as politely as she can by saying she's going to be blunt, and definitely excuse her if she accidentally oversteps her station here. But the two of them need to have a serious talk about their motives, because Eglantine is under the impression that Anastasius is proposing to her for political reasons, to the point she's considering becoming the Ob to avoid marrying into another's family, because female Obs have to have men marry into theirs. She suggests that Anastasius choose the path that will allow her to live as peacefully as possible, and he agrees, finishing that part of their discussion saying that her report was more fruitful than he expected. She then decides to go for broke, and tell him to focus on whirling since he's noticeably worse than her. Also, compliment her more on it. Double also, she'll give him the love song that Ferdinand performed that made all the women swoon back in part 3. Yeah, this is starting to push it a bit, so he returns with some harsh advice for her too. She needs to hide her emotions better, and not be so loose with information. The way she is now, she's liable to be exploited. So she thanks him and promptly passes out. When she wakes up, it's been 3 days, and everyone had a panic attack over her collapsing in front of a prince. When she's better, Leonore comments how shocked they were even after being informed of her poor health. She also has a very concerned letter from Anastasius and Eglantine. But that's not all. Wilfried tells her to go back home as soon as she goes down for breakfast, and she really doesn't want to, because there goes her precious reading time. Also, she's not supposed to go back yet because the dedication ritual isn't for like another week and a half, almost 2. But no, Sylvester is calling her back because of all the absurd reports he's gotten, and he wants to hear what she's been up to from the person in question. Angelica steps in to back her up, since she hasn't passed all of her classes yet, meaning she'll miss her chance to learn the 4th step of mana compression. That letter from Eglantine and Anastasius proves crucial here, since now she can use that as an excuse to make preparations to leave. So she's taking both the song she's written in the academy home, with hopes that Ferdinand will compose the song for the Goddess of Light, and she writes a letter to Anastasius to report her return to Ehrenfest, apologizing for her rudeness and to give him the song for the Goddess of Earth to sing for Eglantine. Then, to earn some extra points, she asks for Eglantine's favorite flowers and the dress color for her graduation ceremony. That way she can get a hairpin made that Anastasius can give to her. She then writes a letter to Eglantine saying she'll bring some Rinsham back for her as well. The next day, an ordinance comes in from the prince and shows that he's pretty pleased with the song and definitely stoked for the hairpin. This is such a train wreck in slow motion in hindsight. Because Rosemine is a pretty naive, self-centered narrator, we don't know just how much these little gestures to please the prince actually impact the political landscape of this story. We'll get hints later on in this book, but the full repercussions we won't know until part 5. Her next stop is the library to top off Schwartz and Weiss, since she'll be gone for a few weeks and won't be able to give them mana. Well, basically until the end of term. While she's doing that and informing Solange, she gets an ordinance from Hersher, asking her to return to the dorm. Yeah, she's pretty pissed off she wasn't informed of her soon departure. So she heads back, and Hersher dumps a bunch of boxes on her with broken magic tools and research documents for Ferdinand. Hersher wants him to fix these because Ferdinand made them in the first place, but the research documents will prove valuable leverage for her. That way she can have Ferdinand assist with the clothes creation, because they can expect this to require all of Ehrenfest. Otherwise, they're gonna embarrass their duchy. Commoners can't make magic circles, so Rosemine is gonna have to do all that herself. Right before she leaves, Angelica passes, with the entire Knights course helping her study to cram for the exam. And that's that. She's finally gonna graduate. So as she's leaving, her attendants will have to support Wilfried when socializing kicks off in full force. Her knights are going to need to train, and her scholars are expected to do some serious info gathering this semester. Judith hasn't finished her classes yet, but that's only because everyone else rushed. She's also aiming for actually high grades. So with that, Rosemine, Riarda, Cornelius, Angelica, and Leonore all head back to Ehrenfest. The first person to greet her is Charlotte, but that lasts all of a few seconds before Bonifatius and Karstedt mention her did her game and worrying about her. But Sylvester nabs her and drags her kicking and screaming into his office. This is the main event. They clear the room and the interrogation begins. The first thing they want to know is everything she spoke to Anastasius about without her retainers. But there's a long line of events that led up to that. So she's gonna have to go from the beginning. Where she basically picked a fight with him during the fellowship gathering, causing her guardian trio to flip out, and that's just the start. She goes on to say during whirling practice she promised to never approach him, and that's incredibly weird. Next was the tea party, where she tells them how he's in love with the candidate from Klausenberg, who's actually a former princess, and whichever prince she marries is most likely going to be the next king. Ferdinand tells her she's in too deep from that alone, because this is info that only those close to the royal family know. The issue is, Rosemine's now elbow deep in this, and Sylvester now has to choose who Ehrenfest is going to support due to these political waves. Yeah, Ehrenfest is going to be sucked into this because of her. From there, she goes on to Schwartz and Weiss, since they led to her summons, and also how she took control of them, which they just kind of have to accept. But to them, they are learning that the academy is in dire straits for staff. Karstedt pats Sylvester on the back for adopting Rosemine now, because otherwise she would have been taken by the sovereignty. She then drops the songs and research on Ferdinand to lessen the lecture, but those aren't gonna help. When they learn that she promised a hairpin to Anastasius for Eglantine, that's an issue. Yeah, she didn't ask to do that, and because she didn't get their input, their relationship's gonna become a walking billboard for Ehrenfest's involvement. After Ferdinand pinches her cheeks, he realizes they need to focus on her social skills over the next year big time. All these waves are going to be a mess at the Archduke Conference, so Rosemine plans to inform Benno, Gustav, and Otto to prepare for the coming storm. Sylvester's pissed about her doing all this, but ultimately Ferdinand's biggest issue is if she plans on siding with the second prince. She says no, she's on Eglantine's side because, well, she likes her, but also she thinks she could probably sell a hell of a story based on her life, on top of the hairpin and Rinsham marketing. Sylvester tells her she's thinking too much like a merchant here, and instead needs to focus on the politics. As the Archduke's daughter, that should be her first focus. But why focus on that when the immediate future comes first? So he gives the go-ahead and tells her to tell Benno and co to expect summons. At dinner, Rosemine tells everyone her did her triumph, confusing some because some of these are standard tactics. Well, aside from a Fey Beast in a High Beast and feeding a Fey Stone to the opponent's Fey Beast to make it recover, she tells them that Speed Didder is really messing with all the apprentices and suggests working on their coordination. Bonifatius says that since he's pretty much wrapped up the guard knight's training, he can instead start focusing on the apprentice knights. In her room after dinner, Otillie is thankful that Rosamund took Hartmut as a retainer, but asks if he's causing her problems. She says he's doing a great job, but Otillie is adamant that if he's bothering her, put him in his place. She then writes a letter to Benno, Gustav, and Otto before passing out for the night. The next day, it's time to go to the temple, and Angelica is going with her because, well, she's basically come of age at this point. Just like, not officially yet, she's 15, so might as well. Angelica rides with her and Lessie, and they head off to the temple. On the ride there, she tells Angelica to get along with her temple attendants even if they're commoners. But Angelica honestly seems too dense to even register that fact, and really doesn't have an issue. Once there, Ferdinand tells her to prioritize communicating with the lower city over helping him, mostly because she rushed off to the castle after she woke up and really didn't have a chance to catch up on what's going on. Yeah, that's actually just an excuse so he can spend some time looking over his new research. So she does just that, and she starts looking over everything she'll need to do for her visit to Haldensel in spring. She sends Zom to request a meeting with Ferdinand, but he soon returns saying he's locked in his hidden room and hasn't come out since the previous day when they got there. She goes to check on him, and all of his attendants and Eckhart are looking pretty worried. After talking to him, he still won't come out, even for Rosamund, and she's sort of at a loss. Eckhart urges her to do something, and she has one trick up her sleeve that'll work, but she won't like it because it's gonna piss Ferdinand off, meaning she's gonna get a lecture. So reluctantly, she bites the bullet to get him to come out, saying she not just has a fourth step of her mana compression, but she also wants to teach the former Veronica faction children too. The door opens in a split second, and he asks her if she lost her damn mind. But you know, this is her doing that whole communication thing that he wanted, so he tells her to come back for dinner in his chambers, and they'll talk about it then. So she comes back later, and they have a talk where she says she's still not planning to teach it to her enemies, but she now grasps how big the faction is. Also how the children don't necessarily want to stay in it, but it's kind of unfair they can't leave until they come of age, so she wants to change the contract, but that's not exactly easy, and she'll leave the details to him and Elvira since they know politics a hell of a lot better than she does. But what's her goal here? Well, she actually wants Roderick as her retainer, and she's hoping that binding him with contract magic might make it a bit easier for Sylvester to swallow. Ferdinand roars at her again, but after she explains the reforms that she's made to the dormitory, he realizes she actually has a handle on this. If she can win the kids over, it'd be a drastic shift in the balance of power. They shift the topic to magic tools that Hersher sent, the research, mana compression and such, until dinner finally ends with her trusting Ferdinand to perfect the magic circles on Schwarzenweiss's clothes. He's looking at it as a challenge, so he's definitely pumped. When the blizzard finally calms down, she gets a visit from her merchant friends. With so many there, she can't really go into the hidden room to talk things over. That means she'll have to wear her noble mask through this whole meeting. It starts off by telling Gustav, Benno, and Otto the developments in the academy. She has the order for Eglantine's hairpin, tells Gustav to start preparing for a large influx of merchants, since they're likely going to open business with the sovereignty in Klausenberg, and for Benno, they'll be renaming plant paper to hide the production method. She pitches calling it Lutz paper, but that's shut down real quick. They eventually land on the simple name, Ehrenfest paper, as regions can be used to differentiate between types. Say Ogner paper. Gustav even suggests standardizing it among scholars and using it in the castle. That'll show how versatile it is for marketing. She then throws out the idea for binders and folders for Benno to have, and that's pretty much that. They move on to mobilizing the lower city for mass production in spring. Also, they can prepare for the flood of merchants coming in summer. They can all expect summons to the castle, and she wants them to bring a report on their perspectives of what the lower city lacks to accommodate these visitors. That way they can present it to Sylvester when they get their summons. Ending the meeting on, at the time of that summons, they'll need to end the contracts that she signed with Lutz. This is already mentioned before, but the contracts prevented the spread of the industry while she was asleep. So now that it's a duchy-wide industry, they're kinda getting in the way. So Benno's gonna need to bring him to the castle too when he's summoned. She's barely keeping her noble mask on here. I mean, she's got her fist balled really hard in her lap, because this is like cutting her ties with the lower city entirely. And yeah, it fucking hurts. With that, the blizzard starts to pick up again, and they have to end the meeting. The epilogue picks up with the aftermath of that from Benno's perspective, though it's entirely focused on Lutz. The carriage ride and back at the planting company, Lutz is clearly moping. Benno pulls him to his office and asks him what the problem is. Lutz couldn't really pick up on Rosamund's feelings because, you know, noble mask thing. He just saw her as smiling and wanting to end the contracts. Benno assures him though that she's definitely not happy about it, even if she was smiling. He goes on to lay out that those contracts are in the way. Rosemine's the last person who wants to end them, but honestly, it's for the best for everyone. Blutz is now a cornerstone of this industry. They're gonna be so busy working for her that they don't need those contracts anymore. That was all to secure a line of communication to her, and they already have that. I mean, they're already closely tied. There's no cutting them off. So Lutz finally gets it, and after Mark brings in some tea for them, they get pumped up to do all this work come spring. With that, we've made it through the main story. This time, the side stories are a little more involved, adding not just some flavor to characters, but also filling in the background to this story. So let's get on into it. First up is Honest courting from Anastasius' perspective. He's at a tea party with Eglantine in the interim while Rosemine is in bed sick after her report. This is what gives us a decent amount of the background, but not all of Eglantine's circumstances. That she's a princess, was taken by Klausenberg, and why Anastasius is so infatuated with her. Not just for her beauty, but her kindness, intelligence, and the fact that her mana is expected to surpass his father's. The king listened to the previous op's plea for Eglantine to join the royal family again, and that's when the king laid it out. She could marry either prince and they would be the next king. That was what made Anastasius desire the throne for the first time in his life, because doing so would get him the love of his life. His brother Sigiswald already has a wife from a middle duchy, planning on her becoming his second, but he has no feelings for Eglantine whatsoever. Hell, he hasn't even courted her in person. But the real reason for this tea party was to test Rosemine's advice. You know, that whole bit about being more honest? Hence the title, and he kicks off the conversation with an icebreaker about her tea party with Rosemine earlier in the volume. He asks how Klausenberg feels about Ehrenfest's new trends, and Eglantine gives the political response that Ehrenfest finally seems to be developing the strength to justify its rank. But he's not too sure, since Ehrenfest has produced above average individuals in the past, but they're a mere flash in the pan. But this seems a bit different, as the entire duchy is moving as one currently, at least based off the first years. This makes Anastasius wonder about Wilfried, but he's honestly not seen as bad since he has good grades too. However, it is known that he asks Rosemine for advice. That makes Anastasius believe she's maybe been ordered to support her rival for Ob, but he's not one to let valuable advice go to waste, so he offers Eglantine a sound blocking magic tool. She reluctantly takes it, despite passing on it many times before. But he says it's to put her at ease, so her retainers are still there with her. He hits this all pretty bluntly, saying he was told that she would choose neither him nor his brother, and she denies that, saying Lady Rosemine clearly has loose lips. But Anastasius doesn't back down here. He says he was only aware she wished to return to royalty, and that was the entire reason he sought the throne. But now he's learned that her only real wish is for peace. Eglantine is struggling here, pleading with her eyes for him to stop, but he keeps hitting it home. He doesn't want to grant her grandfather's wish. He only wants to make her happy. His honest feelings seem to get through her political facade, as she points out how shocked she is that he's being so blunt. But this is all because Rosemine told him to in the first place. So he laughs a bit, saying she said such rude things to him along with that advice. Like he needs to practice whirling to be a better match for Eglantine's skills. That he needs to compliment her better and improve his Harspiel before she promptly fainted. This spurs Eglantine to make Anastasius write an apology letter, but he honestly found it more rude she passed out in front of him, period. However, he does relent and asks her for her help writing the letter, making sure it comes from her and not from him to avoid political issues. He invites her to the gazebo, a popular hookup spot on campus, to talk about how to get her grandfather and uncle on their side to make her dream come true. And she doesn't think that'll be easy, but it's way more than he's gotten from her before. So he's feeling pretty invincible. Next up is Life Without One's Lady from Leonore's perspective. She's only back in Ehrenfest for a few days after accompanying Rosemine, choosing not to stay because she'd be pestered for details about Rosemine now that she's her retainer, mostly from her uncle, the current Guy Blaisgang. That plot thread will be more relevant later this part. This is where we learn about the political factions behind Rosemine's retainers. Where Cornelius knows Rosemine doesn't want to be Ob, but Hartmut and Brunhilde are pushing for it. Brunhilde's family hates Veronica with a passion, so they want to see her and her ilk out of power for good. We learn that Riarda is taking some time off, since Rosemine's away to have a nice long chat with her grandson's family, meaning her and Bonifatius are going to have some work to do. Wonder if we'll learn more about that, until he talks to them a bit about Hartmut to hear their thoughts, since, you know, he can lose control of himself pretty easily. But they tell her he was chastised by Rosemine for a different reason than Traugott, and seems to have learned from his mistake. So yeah, basically, they're asking Leonore to head on back to the Royal Academy to keep Rosemine's arch-noble retainers in check, since she's the only one of high enough status to ensure that they don't act against their master's will. This is also her chance to start implementing some of the training she's been developing. So as soon as she's back in the dorm, she picks up on the hints that Brunhilde and Hartmut need to talk. In a private room, Brunhilde is at wit's end with Wilfried, since he keeps accepting any and all tea party invitations and dumping work on Brunhilde to organize despite her not serving him. He took Rosemine saying back him up as her lending them to him. Big mistake. Wilfried also doesn't quite get that Brunhilde and Hartmut don't consider Wilfried part of their faction, even if he does. The funny thing is, him turning on the former Veronica faction after they tricked him put them off more, because if that's how he's gonna treat his allies, why would they want to be his? But Rosemine, on the other hand, values everyone's work, so she actually got bonus points. The tea party that set this tirade off? Yeah, it's an invitation from Dunkelfelger. Wait, what? Yeah, it turns out the little sister of Lestalot, Hannelora, wants to apologize for her brother. And hey, she's in Rosemine's grade, but that's just one request, as more and more keep coming in the next few days. Leonore takes it upon herself to start gaining some data on the knights, working them until they're exhausted to see their limits, and then build training routines based off that, while making them run their paces. Judith finally finishes her classes at the worst possible time. She shows up, all excited to finally train, and is immediately forced to run laps until she collapses. Ralphin shows up about this point, and is pretty pleased to see Ehrenfest is working so hard, not drunk on their victory. Leonore lays it out for him confidentially that Rosemine said they'd have been better off losing their match against Dunkelfelger. That way they would have seen their flaws. That pretty much confuses Ralphin, since what sort of Archduke candidate even talks like that? But even Leonore is at a loss when she pieced it all together. Sure, Rosamine studied the entire Knight's course, read high-level strategy at Karstedt's estate, and seen the Knight's Order in action firsthand, but these orders of hers were way too competent. Leonore understands enough though that the apprentices need to face their limits to grow past them, so she asks Ralphin to schedule a rematch with Dunkelfelger, with the full intention that they're gonna lose. Ralphin smiles because he's a professor, so it's his job to get his students to grow. The day Leonore is due to return to Ehrenfest, Wilfried gathers everyone to tell them they have a challenge from Dunkelfelger. He tries to order Leonore to handle the whole match, but she brushes it off, saying that she has to go back to Ehrenfest, so he'll have to handle it as the only Archduke candidate there. Though it did piss her off quite a bit, he tried to order her around like he was with Brunhilde. She has bigger plans. Like getting with Cornelius? No, not in that way. He spent the entire break with his father listening to strategy for the Lord of Winter fight, so that way they can build a better training regimen. That's the end of our book. Even though the side stories were a little light in page count this time around, it was certainly dense in content, filling in Eglantine's backstory, Anastasius' character and motivation, and also getting us more information on the political landscape of Ehrenfest, since we're finally seeing the key split between the Lies Gang and Florencia factions. And yeah, they are different, but this video is getting long enough, so let's go ahead and dig into my final thoughts. A lot physically happened last volume, and that seems to be the trend for the start of parts. But this is the book where the plot starts to take hold. As the setup is out of the way, our bearings are reestablished, and now it's all on how things unfold from there. Rosemine's first few weeks in the academy were something incredible, but the next few were bad enough that she had to be called back to Ehrenfest early. And that's only at this point because, I assure you, her actions will shape the political landscape for the next few years. Her simple meddling in Anastasius' love life looks like a huge power play, and one that'll definitely get worse as the story develops. Because from her perspective, she's just trying to smooth over a bumpy meeting with a guy that could have her killed for treason fairly easily, by throwing some gifts and apologies his way. But from the outside, it appears that Ehrenfest is building all these trends to be super appealing, and throw their newfound political clout behind Anastasius to be the next king. By actively pushing him to get with Eglantine, that comes off as favoring him over Sigiswald, the older, first, and most likely prince to take the throne. Now you see why Eglantine was so against choosing a side, because whether the princes wanted or not, duchies involved could go to war over this small spat for power. And as we learn more about the precarious situation the royalty is in, as we're already aware, the king was being raised for a support role before he was forced into the war, and then won, making him the next king. The situation is far more likely than we know at this stage in the game, and will become scary in retrospect, as more details are revealed. We're also getting some more hints about the Civil War in this volume, and I really like how it's been explored in this series. It started as a background element explaining the circumstances in Ehrenfest. It's what allowed mine to originally enter the temple due to the mana shortage, because priests and nobles were being sent to the sovereignty or being called back to the noble quarter. And even then, we were just told it was a mana shortage, as all that other stuff wasn't even explained right away. Then in part 3, we learned the actual impact of the mana shortage in the duchy, how the central district is suffering because there's not as much mana in the land, impacting harvests and creating slight food shortages. Then in the last book, we saw from a historical perspective that this is who was involved, what they fought over, and the outcome. Most stories start with this and either backfill the problems to blame on a cataclysmic event like this, or just don't address the repercussions for how the world changed outside of this one niche aspect. What I'm saying is it's usually a single reason, not an entire paradigm shift like it is in this series. And the more we find out about it, the more clear it becomes this country right fucked itself. What I like is this historical analysis is coming after we've known about this for multiple volumes now. We've already seen what stemmed from it. We straight up started with the aftermath of this event and it being mentioned, but not exactly what it entailed. Now, after 14 volumes, we're starting to see the personal aspect of this civil war, who was impacted, how their lives changed, and what their circumstances are that are motivating their actions in the current storyline. Mostly this is seen in Eglantine at this point. I mean, she was a former princess whose father died after winning the first round of the war, and then she was taken by her grandfather as he tries to marry her into royalty to secure stronger bonds with the royal family, because he fears Klausenberg's ranks slipping. This isn't just looking out for her well-being, he's got his entire duchy's future in mind, because Klausenberg was the biggest supporter of the 5th Prince, and having not just a purebred royal, but somebody who has close ties to Klausenberg as the first wife, would mean their duchy is pretty damn secure. The reason they're worried is because Dunkelfelger and the 3rd ranked duchy are a lot more active in securing their own power plays to advance in the rankings. Klausenberg just has less to offer at the moment. Well, besides their previous involvement in the war, and a little bit of baggage that actually isn't sitting too great with the current king at the moment. I mean, we're not going to learn about that until later, but Klausenberg might be the duchy most responsible for the mana shortage. Stay tuned. The romance of Eglantine and Anastasius is a really well-handled side plot in this story for a number of reasons. It showcases so much about high-end noble culture, royalty, gives us glimpses of world building, as well as Rosemine's impact on society. But most of all, it does really well at expanding on character archetypes. Anastasius is pretty much a snobbish prince type that you'd see in any other story, like completely stereotypical, one-dimensional. But we find out he's not just that. He has it in him to make informed decisions and commands the respect of people through strong leadership. Eglantine might seem like this dainty flower princess type, one who might wilt if you look at her wrong, but the reason she acts so polite and proper is due to the thick mask she wears to hide her childhood trauma. And that's not just impacting her in the current day. That trauma has a very real chance of repeating itself if she doesn't take careful steps. In a sense, she kind of has the weight of the whole country on her shoulders. These two work together because there's a genuine chemistry, where Anastasius values Eglantine not just for her status, but for the parts of her that are truly her own. She returns his affection because he cares more for her than as a political pawn, and actively works to distance her from the political turmoil this country is still facing. And this romance is also a good contrast in the story, where we've seen how shitty marriage can be, where people marry for status and politics. It's just kinda nice to see one work where it's based on love, and works in spite of it, even if they end up wrapped up in this shit later down the line. I would also like to point out that Traugott was a sacrificial pawn to showcase Rosemine's growth. In the story, he speaks up against her and she doesn't really think too much about it, but then she learns his true feelings and sympathizes with that, but once he crosses a line, she's fucking done with him. In essence, he's the extension of her dealings with Haas, the direct lineage of the lessons she learned from that incident. As she was told in part 3, she has to learn to cut out the roots of problems, effectively isolate someone to reduce the damage they can cause, and then eliminate them as a threat. She takes a surgical precision to Traugott, and on very short notice too, effectively using the carrot to entrap him using a magic contract to ensure he won't go against her, and also crushing any future hopes he has, because she let him be short-sighted. This is pretty much Rosemine at her most brutal, because of how quick that switch was flipped, and the fact it took people asking her to elaborate for them to understand just how damn calculating this was, speaks volumes to just how much she's grown. So that's it. We're finally done with this book, and things are certainly getting interesting quick. Rosemine was called back for the dedication ritual and to answer for her string of unprecedented screw-ups, but where will she end up next time? We'll find out in Volume 3, when Rosemine has to say goodbye to her lifeline to the lower city, and finally finishes her first year in the Royal Academy. But for now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to Rob and DBL for their continued support. Thanks for watching.